Hi, I'm Stephen Carson coming at you from St. Louis, Missouri, in these United States. Um, I wanted to show something, realized I didn't have a link. Oh, there it is. Okay. Yes, I started something new this week. I was inspired by the chat with Lambda on Lamster last Saturday. Had sort of some follow-up thoughts, developed that thought. I like lists. Developed a list of the differences that egalitarians target and either deny or, and often simultaneously, both deny and try to destroy the difference. Um, I think it's a fun list, and it inspired me enough to start a Substack. So let's see if I can manage to do this and share the link here. I'll probably add it to the, oops, that's not it. Okay, sorry. Let me try that again. Um, yeah, there we go. Okay. Yeah, okay. So I started a Substack, and it is free for now, at least. I just have the one article on it. I have another one that's going to explain a little bit more context around this notion of my view of egalitarianism, which I explained on Lambda, but I thought I'd write it out. So anyway, should be some interesting stuff coming. I encourage you to subscribe. And with that, support the show with Subscribestar and the Bitcoin public wallet. Very appreciated. And with that, let's bring on our guest, Black Horse from Toronto, Canada. Hello, sir.
Good evening. How are you?
Pretty good. Okay, so I want to start with just an overall question. We're going to drill down on two stories, one of which is related to this overall question. The big Twitter story is not, but, well, not super directly, but some people are painting a bleak picture economically, just saying that overall it's looking really bad right now. Just just quick temperature check. What is your impression from your perch?
Yeah, my impression is that things are worse than they've been in a while, but not all so bad as they're being made out. So
Mm-hmm.
if you go back to our stream a couple of weeks ago where we talked about the status of the ruble, we did a pretty thorough review of key commodities. We looked at oil, natural
Mm-hmm.
gas, wheat, those
Right.
kinds of commodities. And at a basic level, we looked at the fact that we've got long-term trends that reflect increases in price that are much more than consumer inflation. Now, that's going to tell us one of two things. Either we're still early on in the Cantillon effect, or we're
Mm-hmm.
in a situation where we've got goods shortages at key elements of the economy that are going to way outpace inflation. Neither of those two things is a particularly good sign for the middle and lower class of our society, and certainly a
Right.
particularly nasty sign for people who are just on the margin.
Yeah.
But these things are not so. I mean, you could have said very similar things in the period between sort of '01 and '06, um,
Mm-hmm.
where, and you could have said much nastier things if you look back to like the famines of East Africa in the '90s, or some
Mm-hmm.
of the East Asian famines in the '50s. So you're not looking at something here that's historically, shocking. But
Right.
you're on the other hand, it might be a rough ride.
Yeah. So I'm seeing some heated up talk of, famine is coming, um, even in Europe, possibly. And, you know, we don't know, that could happen, right? But based on what you're seeing right now, it's looking more like, yeah, we have high prices, might get a bit higher, but we don't really expect there's going to be starving in the streets of Paris, right?
Well, the predicate of all that talk is the idea that the oil and gas and um, agricultural exports of Russia are going to be entirely cut off from the international market. And what we've seen
Right.
so far is that that has not panned out at all.
Right. Okay, so
So
you're segueing right into what we want to talk about. So I'm inclined to get us there, if I can get my computer to work with me. Uh, yeah. So let's bring up that first article. Sound about the right time for that?
sure. Yeah.
Okay. So this is by my friend Ryan McMacken, over at Mises.org. To fight Russia, Europe's regimes risk impoverishment and recession for Europe. So in the marketing, Black Horse, I talked about boomerang sanctions. um, and you tell me if that's an overstated analogy, but my idea there is that um, the West is putting sanctions on Russia, but getting affected by it, by the sanctions
Yeah.
in the West
I,
itself.
I mean, so far that might even be an understated um, polemic. Let's break down the sanctions here for a second before we get into the article. So
Okay.
there's kind of two elements of every sanctions package that the West imposes on anyone. There's the looting part, and then there's the cut off to future trade part. And the looting operation was extremely successful. The United States confiscated more assets in the Russian sanctions than it's ever done in any other sanctions package before. If you were like a sanctions enforcement agent, you did your part. Um, however, the part of the sanctions intended to cut off international trade to Russia has completely failed. Um,
Right.
so, based on a report out from JP Morgan this week, Russia's shipping more volume and dollar value of crude than it was before the war began. Um, Similar story in natural gas. We saw a sharp disruption, but it looks like actually export volumes are up.
Okay, wait. I
Um,
gotta share when you talk about Russia selling more fuel type products. Uh, I gotta share with you the COPE. I think I sent it to you and just get your response. Someone said that's because they're desperate. They're selling at fire sale prices, and that's why they're basically more quantities going out the door because they're practically giving it away. What do you think of that?
I would want to see some receipts.
Yeah.
That's what I would say to that. So you see, the analysis in this Mises article is very similar to the analysis you see elsewhere. That both the alternate market strategy that Russia's pursued, and the fact that commodities are indistinguishable once they hit the international market, uh, really makes it sort of beyond credulity to believe that the sanctions as currently constituted are effective. In
Yeah.
order to properly sanction a commodities exporting nation, you have to impose a blockade, and most of Russia's neighbors have declined to impose a blockade.
Right. Yeah. So, right. So this is an important distinction that comes into these things. What do you call it? Fungible commodities? I don't know. But basically, it gets complicated like in oil because there's like crude and all this stuff. But anyway, within a certain category of oil, whether it's from Russia or from the U.S. or wherever it's coming from, there's I think oil coming from South America as well, right, and so on and so forth. Ultimately, it gets to a point where you can't tell where it came from, and the market price, there's a world market price, and it's pretty difficult, like you said, without just a full on building a wall around a country. It's difficult for that world market price to really be very different anywhere in the world. Right.
Yeah, and you see this, like, there are places in the world where oil is locked in and effectively blockaded. So, like,
Mm,
tar sands oil from central Canada trades at a very significant discount to oil at any port at sea, because the lack of pipelines means that it has to be transported by rail from central Canada.
right.
So transport by rail costs a lot of money, so it trades at like a $20 discount or something from oil accessible to the sea. But at present, there doesn't seem to be any lack of transportation to get oil out of Russia, so I wouldn't expect any significant discount in their commodity sales compared to other nations.
Yeah, or to put it another way, if there's any leak in a blockade, that is, Russia can sell oil and gas to someone, and from
Then
there it can
the
be sold
commodity
on.
gets laundered onto the international market from there.
Exactly right. So unless you just basically, you have to just about 100% blockade them. If there's any leak at all, then it's out there and they're just getting the world price. And that's it, right?
That's correct.
Okay, so what does Ryan start with here? He says European politicians are eager to be seen as doing something, but they don't really want to provoke a military conflict, and so they're punishing Moscow by by cutting Europeans off from much needed Russian oil and gas. Okay, so the thing about being an economist or talking about economics is you end up just pointing out stuff that just seems so like stupidly obvious, and yet somehow in the world of politics it isn't. So let me just state the stupidly obvious. Protectionism, sanctions, to a great degree, the government imposing these things that's supposedly targeted at the bad foreigner over there is the primary person who gets hit by it is the citizen of their own country, right? So if Europe is making it harder to get Russian oil and gas, the main person that gets hit by that, we just explained why Russia doesn't particularly get hit by it. They just sell it somewhere else into the world market. But the people who get hit by it are the people in Europe who pay some premium because now they're not getting the most convenient access that they were. It's not as convenient to get it, right?
The estimate in the article is that the price of oil in Europe, X of Russian supplies, would go to $185 a barrel. Whether that estimating these things is extremely difficult. So
Yeah.
whether that estimate is actually accurate, who knows? But certainly would trade at a significant premium as a consequence of those actions.
I'm sorry, not all of us know what how much per barrel is more like normal right now. So what would be normal?
Right now, oil is trading right around $100 a barrel. So $185 a barrel would be like
nearly doubling,
85% premium on the continent.
Yeah, which you're going to feel that. Having said that, that would be if zero Russian oil makes it through the world market to Europe, right?
Yeah, well, as I say, estimates of this kind are notoriously difficult.
Yeah.
Demand for oil is very inelastic, so it's hard to see how much demand destruction actually will occur in an economy as a consequence of lack of supply, etc.
Right. Now, I noticed we were talking about, blockading Russia, right? Here, Ryan takes it the other way around, and he says, "Can Europe totally cut itself off?" So where he's going here would be, can Europe really not receive any oil that ultimately came from Russia, right? And I'm sorry, that even oversimplifies, right? Because
and the answer is no, because how are they going to track it through a third party country? Like,
right, but when that
oil leaves Shanghai Harbor, how do you know where it came from? Good luck.
There's even a stronger thing we can say, right? Which is that, let's say somehow magically, Russian oil glows with evil, right? And you can just tell that it's Russian, and you don't bring it into Europe because of it being a world market and because of it being fungible. So China, instead of getting oil from over here, gets it from Russia, and the oil they would have been getting from over here goes to Europe. So it just shifts around, right? So even if you don't get a drop of Russian oil into Europe, that doesn't mean that you have successfully affected the demand and supply.
All it means is you've totally reoriented international shipping, and it will probably be more expensive as a consequence.
Right. You are now paying a shipping cost in Europe for causing this silliness, and you're not actually punishing Russia. You're punishing yourself. Is what it comes down to. Okay, so anything else you would want to highlight from this article? I mean, really, it's really a simple point. I mean, I don't know that we need to belabor it, which is just that Europe is feeling some consequences. Maybe not the dramatic consequences you might imagine because of the world market being fungible, but they're going to get some higher fuel prices, right? And I think they already are. Um,
Well, and it looks like they're trying to do more still, and we'll see what more they do, and if they do more. I mean, the article makes the point that the EU Commission is waiting until after the French election in order to drop the official hammer banning imports from Russia, because they're anticipating the increase in fuel costs. So, you know,
Democracy.
politics is thick as it always is.
Okay, yeah. So anything else we want to get from this? Oh, he says at the end, the United States to the rescue. Um, United States will bail us out, right? Oh yeah. Now this actually happened, right? Didn't Biden send reserves over to Europe or something?
Yeah, Biden tapped the strategic petroleum reserve, I guess, last week. Um, so that will have some moderating effect on oil prices for a period of time. I don't
Yeah,
recall exactly how much he tapped out of the U.S. Strategic Reserve, but the U.S. Strategic Reserve isn't that large compared to the international market.
right.
So it's not I mean, it'll have some effect. How much I don't know.
And that's a button he can only press so many times, right? Before
Well, and ironically, the
somebody
U.S.
goes,
government
hey, wait a second, our strategic reserve is called a strategic reserve for a reason, and if you completely empty it out, that's probably not a great idea, right?
Well, ironically, the U.S. Strategic Reserve has been it's designed from a series of naturally formed caves, and it can only be emptied and refilled a certain number of times. And U.S. presidents have tapped it so many times in order to curb rising fuel prices that there's some speculation the Strategic Reserve, as a piece of infrastructure, may need to be rebuilt as a consequence of one of these, as a consequence of all this use.
Oh, okay. Because I'm picturing just, big metal containers and you just put stuff in, you take the stuff back out, and you're saying, no, no, no.
No, what they actually did is they capitalized on natural underground structures,
Hmm.
in order to have enough space, because it's millions of barrels that they have down
Right,
there.
right.
Um, and apparently the engineering specs only allow you to empty it and refill it like 20 times or something. Um, and you might remember during the Bush years, this was done multiple times to try to deal with the oil premium created by the Iraq War.
Okay.
Um, so
Wow. So yeah, so it's not even so much that they'd run out of oil down there. It's that we wouldn't even be able to. We'd have to do something new. We wouldn't even be able to have a strategic reserve, at least not in that spot, and not to
well,
the capacity that it's at.
you'd have to, break out those engineering muscles that USG is famous for and build something new.
Right. Okay, so let's transition to the next article. Here we're talking about seeing some fuel prices that are higher, which I've been noticing my at the pump prices are higher, and we've analyzed that a bit in a previous show. Um, but as we pointed out, that was a trend that we were already seeing before the war started. What we're talking about here with this article is that Europe would be having a consequence, not exactly of the war, right, but of the sanctions um, that were put in place because of the war. And so that would push them up a little bit more. Um, but then there's another angle on sort of unintended side effects of what the government is doing. And one of the things you mentioned is that this has been the most complete kind of sanctioning that the U.S. has done, trying to like really cut Russia off, right?
Well, I mean, it's somewhat unique in the financial package that they applied, but I mean, it looks a lot like the playbook they applied to Cuba, a lot like the playbook they
Mm-hmm.
applied to Venezuela.
Right,
The
right.
only difference is like those economies are comparatively tiny,
Yeah,
and those economies are a lot easier to blockade.
right.
So, uh, especially because they're very dependent on, well, I mean, if you think back to the time they did Cuba, almost all Cuban manufactured goods came from the United States. So a lot easier to blockade exports to a country than to blockade imports from a country.
Right. So one of the things they did is that they used the power of the US dollar, right?
Ah, yes, that's also
And
true.
and the problem with that is how do we put this? Let's see. Okay, so let's use an analogy real quick. You keep your money at a bank. You've been banking with them for a long time. You feel safe with them. I'm really telling a fantastical tale here, but anyway, in drawing this analogy. But let's say you feel really safe keeping your money at this bank. Um, and then you see that the bank has become a little political in its actions. And they didn't do it to you, but to another depositor, they like grabbed everything that they had deposited there because they didn't like what that depositor had done politically, or they didn't like their political views or something. Now, the interesting part in this story, actually, people focus on the effect on, the depositor who got his stuff seized, right? But I think sort of what's interesting about this story is to look at the effect on the depositor who didn't get his assets seized, but saw
That's
what happened, right?
that's right. Finance is a confidence game, and
Yes,
everybody watches everything you do.
right.
And so I think you've got an article there that
Yeah, let's
people will
go to
find
that.
interesting.
Right. So the headline is, this is from Bloomberg. Um, Israel adds yuan to their $206 billion reserves in philosophy change. It mentions in the subhead Canadian, Australian, and Japanese currencies also added to the basket, and they're reducing their allocation of dollars and euros. So the whole idea is when we talk about the US dollar as the world reserve currency, whether you liked it or not, there's been a sense of the U.S. dollar is, stable or something like that, right? It's you can kind of trust it. You have confidence in it. You may not like it that the U.S. has got this dominance in the world, but you have confidence in the dollar. It's a good thing to keep in your bank. Why is it that Israel, our greatest ally, by the way, if you haven't heard, I know you're Canadian, you may not know that Israel is the United States' greatest ally. I hope you don't feel snubbed since you're right there next to
Ah,
us. But anyway, um, uh, since our greatest ally is keeping less of our dollars, less U.S. dollars, why would they do that? Why would they back off
well,
from keeping some dollars in their central their reserves?
when Russia made a foreign policy decision that the United States did not approve of, uh, they had billions of dollars of of USD cash reserves sitting primarily in the Fed Bank of New York. That money is still sitting in the Fed Bank of New York, and Russia is not even allowed to use it to pay their own bondholders. So many countries around the world observed this. You saw France repatriate its US dollar reserves into European banks. You've seen Israel take the strategic decision that they're going to diversify the basket of their holdings. And you've seen many other, you know, fairly low profile movements
and some
toward,
movements into gold or something, or bringing some gold home and stuff like that, right? We saw a story
yeah,
about that.
yeah. So one of the other things that people probably don't know about is that even though on paper most countries have gold reserves, many of their gold reserves are not held domestically in the country. They're
Right.
held in places like the Fed Bank in New York.
Mm-hmm.
Canada, for example, has no gold reserve of its own, but we still have a mint building that holds like thousands of tons of gold. Um, and all that gold doesn't belong to the Canadian government. It belongs to a combination of private citizens and foreign governments that decide that Canada would be a very good place to store their gold.
Mm-hmm.
And in this climate where the looting portion of sanctions is becoming increasingly common, it's starting to look like a less good idea to do that.
Right. So I had this naive idea because I don't know how these things work that when we hear that Russia or any other country, right, has a large amount of US dollar reserves, I pictured that they had that in some sense at their bank, right? Or like you said, like gold, they have gold reserves. Oh, well, surely that's at, you know, French gold reserves are stored in France. And what you're saying is that's actually not how the world had been working. A lot of times your reserves would be held under the control of ultimately
No, apparently prior to this decision by the French government, all like 90% of their gold reserve was out of the country.
right.
Um,
And then they
so
decided we're feeling a little nervous about that arrangement, and we'd like to have physical control of that gold, right?
something like that, yes.
Yeah.
What's the
Okay.
opposite of physical removal? Physical return?
Yeah, physical return, right? Right. So what's happening is that was a really good line. You said that it's a confidence game. The sense of confidence that, um, if I have some reserve, if I, as France or Israel or whoever, I have some reserves at the U.S., those are safe. That's not a political thing. It's just a financial arrangement. That's just where they're stored. Well, what the U.S. government is showing is if we can get our mitts on it and we don't like something you've done, politics trumps, right? Politics wins and we will grab it. Um, Perhaps not fully thinking through, who knows, right, with our so-called elite, but perhaps not fully thinking through what the implications of that are, which is that other people are going to go, I don't think I want to keep my stuff where the United States government can get a hold of it, because who knows when they're going to decide that they don't like what I've done and just start grabbing my stuff, right?
Well, Israel is a great example of, our greatest ally, quote unquote, but the United States has at various junctures been, quite disappointed in Israeli foreign policy.
Right.
So um, I would say that it is uh, an astute move if you are an Israeli central banker not to have assets in the United States at the moment.
Right. Yeah. So you would not see them as being dumb by doing this. You would see this as a perfectly rational action, especially in light of the watching what the United States has done to Russia. Right.
Yeah, I mean the two have a history that is at least somewhat mixed in this regard. It's not inconceivable that Israel could find itself targeted in the future.
Right. Yeah. And now we see what happens when you get targeted. Right.
Yes.
The U.S. government grabs all your stuff.
Anything that it can grab, it does grab, whether
Right.
that's yachts
Exactly.
docked at U.S. ports or whether that's
Right. Right. The
or
yachts. Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, so maybe just one before we leave it, just one more sort of way of thinking about this is historically, at least, and I don't know if this has changed in recent decades, but historically, Swiss banks had this worldwide reputation that it didn't matter what your politics were, they're not going to ask a lot of questions. You park your stuff with them, and it's going to be safe, right? Um, and a result of this was that a lot of stuff went to Switzerland for storage, gold and so forth. Gold and valuables were stored in Switzerland because people felt safe doing that. Well, it seems to me the U.S. government is trying to become like the bizarro world Switzerland, right? Where
Something
rather
like
than
that.
things flowing to the U.S. as a safe haven, they flow out of the U.S. as potentially one of the worst places to keep your stuff because the U.S. will let politics trump its guarantee of safety, of safe harbor,
Well,
right?
and not to rag on the U.S. too much, like
Yeah.
lots of countries do this, where they steal
Mm-hmm,
people's
mm-hmm.
stuff because they disagree with the regime.
Right.
This is like the standard state of play. I mean, forever Miami has been considered the unofficial capital of Latin America because every person who's an elite in Latin America stores their assets in Miami to avoid the vicissitudes of local politics.
Right. Right. Yeah, but here's the difference, right? In regards to the U.S. dollar, is that it seems to me that the U.S. dollar status as world reserve currency has given the
hangs in this balance.
United States government latitude in its actions, right? It's
Well,
able to do things that other governments are not able to get away with because of the U.S. dollar's status as world reserve currency. So, if it loses that status, if people get more and more nervous and back off, stop holding U.S. dollars in reserve, start trying to look for alternative ways to get things done financially, that starts to restrict the actions of the U.S. government, right?
yeah, then you'll become like other countries.
Ooh, wait, what's that? What is that thing they say? Wait, the special nation, I'm forgetting the term. They've got this term. The neocons like to use it. The
Oh,
exceptional
exceptionalism.
American exceptionalism. Yes, yes. America would lose its exceptionalism potentially on the world stage, um,
Oof.
which is of course exactly what I
You'll
want.
be one of us.
Not to be subtle
You'll
about it.
be one of us.
One of us. Yeah, yeah. Practically Canada at that point. Just a slightly larger Canada. Or slightly more populated Canada, I guess is the right way to say it.
There you go. Anyway, shall we
Okay,
we
yeah.
move on to our second story here?
Right. So, final story. And I was a little hesitant to cover this at first, but as Black Horse and I discussed it, I was more and more convinced because, for one thing, we sort of live in two worlds on YouTube. The people, me and Academic Agent and friends, right? One world is that we are just out there on YouTube and random people can find our stuff, right? And they do. On the other hand, we have a sort of community of people who tend to watch Academic Agent and friends, I gather. I certainly watch a lot of stuff from my various YouTube friends. And so, though that I have seen people covering the Twitter story, I haven't seen it covered that well within our circles. So I hadn't thought about it that way before, but we kind of have our own little sub-world. And so I don't have to worry too much about the fact that, some channel that has gazillion subscribers has talked about Twitter, because maybe Academic Agent hasn't talked about it very well, right? Or any of my other friends in these circles. And so it's worthwhile covering it. But also, here's the thing that really hooked me into thinking we should cover this, is that it sheds a little bit of light. It brings a little bit of interest to something that I think really is interesting and important. And that's this topic of corporate governance. And corporate governance feels, and Black Horse maybe where we can't fully see this because of sort of we're in this world, right, to some degree. But corporate governance feels to me like how economics in general, I think, can seem, which is it's just a dry topic and it's not of interest to people in general. But this Elon Musk trying to take over Twitter thing seems to really have people interested. So I feel like this is the time to strike and talk a little bit about what this has revealed about where we are in the world of corporate governance. I think it's been sort of, some people have been sort of surprised at the board's actions. I'll see what you think of, whether it's surprising, but I think outsiders have been surprised.
Why don't we tell the story and then we can talk about the narrative implications.
Yeah. So tell the story.
The story is that Mr. Musk, observing that, in his opinion, Twitter is an asset that is desirable to own, took quietly a 7% stake in Twitter, and was offered a board seat under the condition that he would not purchase more than 15% of Twitter, and he declined that opportunity. A couple of days later, he issued a public filing making an all-cash offer for Twitter at, I think it was $54, about a 30% premium over the market price at the time. And he took to Twitter to effectively heckle the board to try to convince them to accept his offer.
Right. So pause right there and just tell us, having kept your eye on this kind of market, buyouts and leverage buyouts and all this sort of stuff. Does that kind of offer seem like one that would be easily dismissed by a board typically? If we took the personalities out of this and the political implications out of this, if it was just some random company and this offer was made, would people just be like, that's ridiculous. That's a ridiculous offer. Forget it.
I would say that it's a fair premium.
Okay.
It's not. It's about what you would expect to have a
Mhm.
30% premium for control.
Right.
Um,
So it's not a low ball. It's not a low ball
it's not a
offer. It's
low
a
ball,
reasonable offer.
but on the other hand, and I think Mr. Musk would argue that before he took his 7% stake, the stock was down at $30, so it's
Right.
really more like a 70% premium over where the stock was where he got interested in it,
Right.
which would
Which
make,
is nice.
if you took that position, that's a very healthy premium.
Yeah, yeah. And I thought usually it would there's a fiduciary duty, right? Um, if a deal like this that can give the shareholders a 70% value on their investment is offered, there's a fiduciary duty to either accept the offer because hey, that looks like we're doing good by the shareholders, or to say, hey, this is a company that's growing like gangbusters. 70% premium is nothing because we're going to be worth 10 times that next year because we're a Silicon Valley startup that's shooting to the moon or something, right? That would be the
Yeah.
rational reason to reject it. And I think the general
Or
argument here
to
with
say
Twitter
that
is,
I've got some alternate bidder for a controlling stake
yeah,
is
okay,
the
sure,
other piece.
the other also, okay, but that option of um, this is this is going to the moon. This is a ridiculous offer when you look at our growth prospects. Um, that I don't think anyone is buying in the case of Twitter, right? Because
Uh,
it's been kind of floundering. It's not going to the moon.
no, the argument is not credible,
Yeah, yeah,
and it's rendered much less credible because of the weakness of the sort of tech market over the last 6 months. So, I mean, you can look at a chart for, you know, Facebook. You can look at a chart for Netflix is a really good example. They had their earnings out last night. The stock was down, I think,
yeah,
30%.
right.
Um, so it's not a really healthy market for assets like Twitter, at least compared to the kind of market that it was for the last 3 years.
Mm-hmm.
So it's going to be very, very hard for the board at Twitter to argue that it is not in the interests of its shareholders to accept a cash offer at a premium of this kind.
Strictly on a dollars and
So
cents point of view, right? But I
that's
think
right.
part of what this is surfacing is that decisions are made that aren't purely about
Well,
good financial outcomes for the shareholders.
so let's talk about what has actually happened here versus
Yeah,
what might happen.
yeah, okay,
So Twitter's board elected not to respond at all to Musk's offer. Uh, Instead, they held a vote to uh, implement something called a limited shareholders rights plan,
okay.
which
I'm
is
bringing up that story. Twitter board adopts poison pill after his bid to buy the company.
yes, poison pill is your quality 1980s venture capitalist term to
Right.
describe a measure that the board can take to prevent the to prevent a hostile takeover by giving the board unilateral authority to issue new shares for sale at discount to existing shareholders of the company. So the way that this works is that if Mr. Musk attempts to uh, put out a tender offer and buy up a controlling interest of Twitter without offering without agreement from the board, that the board will issue shares for purchase to shareholders that are shareholders of record prior to some date. I don't know
Oh,
exactly
they
what
can
that date
actually do
is.
that. They can actually do that,
Yes,
so they can exclude him from that
they.
deal.
That's right. The
Oh
whole premise is that
wow.
they get to exclude him,
Okay.
and they can do this for a limited period of time. And if it's deemed not to be in the fiduciary interests of the company, then a court is supposed to strike it down. So the way that this typically go, poison pills are not a strategy to prevent an acquisition. They're a strategy to delay an acquisition in
Mm,
hopes that you can stop it through some other means or in hopes of extracting more money from the acquirer. So
hmm.
there are a couple of ways of reading this tactic. This Most companies, when hit with a hostile offer, will invoke a poison pill in order to negotiate.
Okay, I was going to
So
ask that. This is not like some weird thing. This is a thing that companies often do.
that's right, and they do it usually to extract more money from the buyer.
Mm,
Uh,
mm-hmm,
Mr. Musk has publicly taken the position that his $56 price is the price and there is no higher bid.
mm-hmm.
Um, whether that's really true or not, in a negotiation like this, public utterances should be taken with a grain of salt. Um, and so there's all sorts of speculation going on that this is a technique designed to prevent Twitter from falling into the hands of an evil free speech advocate. Um, s- whether that's really true, you would only actually know if you were sitting inside the boardroom at Twitter.
Right. Okay. So
Uh,
you're saying that ignoring motivations for a moment, these actions could be the appropriate actions for just maximizing the sale price effectively. Right.
that's right. And if you were the Twitter board, one of the paths forward you could have here is to try to, solicit other bidders, see if you can
Mm-hmm.
create some kind of bidding war. This is what you would do if you were acting in the fiduciary interests of your shareholders.
Okay. So what is the significance of like Vanguard increasing their position?
So this is the other thing that is interesting about this, and I think this has been badly covered in a lot of places.
Okay.
So Vanguard, BlackRock, etc., all took larger positions in Twitter as a consequence of this action.
Mm-hmm.
Um, it should be noted that Vanguard, BlackRock, etc., most of the capital they have is not like 99% of the capital they have is not their discretionary capital. It's capital that they manage on behalf of
Mm.
investors in passive investment vehicles.
Right.
These passive investment vehicles have formulas for investment that are based on the market capitalization of a stock. And so when a stock goes up in price like 30%, the way that Twitter did when Musk announced his 70% stake, you would expect a significant increase in the stake held by Vanguard, BlackRock, etc., because their
Uh,
investment formulas are based on market capitalization.
I see.
So
So
it's
rather than seeing it as all nefarious, this is just like the algorithm kicked in, basically.
well, so definitely the algorithm kicked in. Um, what's interesting is these algorithms recently have come under a significant degree of skepticism because
Mm.
including it in the algorithm is this ESG score
Uh,
that evaluates the sort of ESG stands for environmental, social, and governance score,
right.
which evaluates the company based on their adherence to a set of social values. Um,
Right.
and
It's effectively sort of a political correctness score. The more politically correct you are, the higher your ESG score, or something like that, right?
that's right. And people are
Yeah.
arguing that BlackRock, etc., jacked the ESG score of Twitter in order to direct
Mm.
dollars there in order to make it more difficult to purchase. Um, so that, I mean, whether that actually happened there's complex mathematical analysis to do. Um,
Hmm.
the movements that you see in the stake are not they're not entirely unexpected based on what you've seen with the price action.
Oh, okay. So you don't have to bring that ESG element in to plausibly
Y-
explain the increase in their stake. It's just Musk bought shares. It caused everybody's like, "Whoa, what's Musk up to?" Twitter shares went up. Their algo kicked in and said, "Oh, we should have more shares of that company because it's a more valuable company now." Right?
that's right. So they're
Yeah.
always one of the strange things about the way that index funds work is um, they're always allocating funds to the largest capitalized companies already. So
Mm-hmm.
it's this kind of winner take all model of investing. Anyways,
Right.
um,
Right.
you can quite readily explain, particularly the BlackRock allocation. The Vanguard allocation might be as a result of discretionary action by their managers. They have much more discretionary capital in Vanguard than
Mm.
exists in BlackRock.
Hmm. Okay, so is there anything people are like they're up to no good, right? Did you see the story about Florida Governor Ron DeSantis saying that
Yeah, so
he's
there
thinking about
there's a
going after the
massive
board because they're abusing the um, the Florida pensioners who have their money invested in Twitter or something like that, right?
Yeah, so Twitter, so Musk took the tact of attacking the Twitter board on Twitter
Mm-hmm.
to argue that that they were not, if they don't put it to a shareholder vote, they're not acting in the interest of their shareholders.
Mm,
The Twitter board has declined to respond, but Musk has a number of allies who are, parroting his rhetoric, including guys like Mark Andreessen
mm,
and some
mm,
other very prominent people in the investment community. Uh, Apparently, uh, Florida man has picked up this rhetoric as well and said, you're not acting in the interest of our pensioners. All that seems very thick to me for a hostile takeover that's now what, a week and a half old.
mm-hmm.
Um, but hypothetically, if Twitter's board does not properly consider the offer, the next step will be for Musk and or their shareholders to take them to court over the question of whether they've fulfilled their fiduciary responsibility to their
Right.
shareholders.
And
This
this
is
this is
complicated
not
by the fact that
this is
the
not
board of
unusual.
directors at
For it to end up in the courts is not unusual. This happens, right, with this sort of
yeah,
hostile takeover
it,
thing.
it happens. I mean, one of the interesting wrinkles of this is that the board of Twitter owns almost no Twitter stock, which is quite unusual and quite, I would say, quite perverse. So I
Oh
think
yeah, I
that's
saw the list of holdings and Jack Dorsey's was like the biggest, and it wasn't that
Jack
big.
Dorsey is the biggest, and other than Jack Dorsey, the total holdings are less than 1% of Twitter
Oh
stock
wow. Okay,
on
I
the
didn't
board.
catch that. And that is unusual.
Not
Usually
maybe even less than
the board would have
maybe
more
even less
skin
than
in
a
the
half a
game.
percent.
The board would have more skin in the game typically.
You would expect the board to be composed of some of the largest shareholders.
I see.
Now,
Interesting.
maybe some of those board members represent the interests of the large passive investors in Twitter, but
Mm-hmm. Right, right.
certainly they're very, because they have no personal skin in the game, they're very, very vulnerable to lawsuit.
Oh, really? Interesting.
Well,
I see. Because
e-
if you have more skin in the game, you're like, hey, this is my own money, and I think this is what we should do with this company that I'm heavily invested in. You're kind of in a stronger position legally, right?
that's correct.
Yeah.
Whereas in this case, if you own almost none of the company, um, it's very difficult to make that argument in a court of law, especially if we get 3 months down the line and Twitter stock is still, $30 or $40 and the offer was 56.
Right. Real quick, in the chat way earlier, Lowell said, which of Elon's billionaire mates has agreed to put in a billion or so just for the fun of it, do you reckon? And our friend Jay Green River says, Teal, Dorsey, and Andreessen, first and foremost. Um,
Yeah, these are all people who have come out publicly and endorsed the offer. Uh, Elon
now,
has publicly speculated that he might bring in some partners.
oh,
All of that is not, I mean, he's publicly speculated in a tweet that he might bring in some partners. What do you do with that? Well, I don't know.
hey, so I didn't know that Dorsey. I mean, I kind of sensed he was he was starting to snipe at the board, right? But did Dorsey endorse this buyout by Musk?
Dorsey has kind of Dorsey has taken shots at the board publicly on
Mm-hmm.
Twitter, critiquing I mean, he was commenting on a Twitter thread about how boards of directors destroy billions of valuation in Silicon Valley companies.
Mm.
Um, so, I mean, this is Dorsey watching. This is not like read the, in the '80s we talked about Fed watching. Well, now we're Dorsey watching. So,
We've got a tweet from him in one of the articles here up on the screen. It says, this is from April 15th, so nearly a week ago, but he says, as a public company, Twitter has always been for sale. That's the real issue. I don't totally understand what he's getting at there, actually.
Well, what he's getting at is that he's getting at the argument from the board that the that the board is taking the position that the control premium at 30% is insufficient.
Mm,
And the concept that a control premium should exist for a public company is a concept that has always been of dubious legal standing, because the question of whether a poison pill, these tactics that people use to prevent hostile takeovers, whether any of them are legal, has always been a difficult part of securities law.
okay. And I'm sorry, what did you say? Control premium?
A
Meaning
control
like,
premium is the difference between a takeover price and a hostile takeover versus the price of nominally acquiring all the stock.
mhm,
So uh, when so not so Elon's offer is nominally 30% more money than it would take to buy all of the shares of the stock on the public market at present trading prices.
right.
That difference is referred to in the industry as a control premium. So a
Okay,
premium to
so
take
is it controversial
control.
that there's any control premium, or just that the magnitude of it seems a little bit too
So
big?
the magnitude has always been an object of negotiation. The
Hmm.
tactics used to raise the magnitude have always been controversial.
Right,
So this has always been like a huge issue in corporate governance. How
right,
much premium?
because it's not clear that this is to the benefit of the shareholders.
Well, if I
It might
was
be
a
it might
minor,
be to the benefit of the current management of the company that wants to keep on being in control of the
that,
company, right?
that's right. If I was a minor shareholder of Twitter, I had like 100 shares in my investing account.
Right.
$56 a share looks awfully good to me.
Right. Yeah. Right. Because as we said, it's not like you're expecting Twitter to go to the moon in the next 12 months or something, right?
Yeah,
So
or if
this is
you
a good
are,
deal.
then yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Uh, right. Okay. So so has anything been revealed about corporate governance here beyond it being sort of a teaching moment about how things usually work with hostile takeovers and stuff? Has anything been revealed that is um, making people feel that investors feel that, hey, are these companies really being run to the benefit of me, the shareholder? Because like everybody's a shareholder pretty much at this point. Or are they being run, to the personal tastes of boards and managers and stuff? Is
Yeah, I
that
mean,
raising
I
questions?
I think this is an educational moment for most people about how powerful boards of directors actually are in
Hmm.
moments like this. Um, Musk has tried to make this about the politics of Twitter, and it may yet become about that.
Right.
But at the moment, I mean, Musk made a tweeted about Netflix and their terrible earnings and terrible subscriber numbers overnight and connected it to the Twitter issue, um, which is, but as of yet, this is playing out like a pretty standard hostile takeover. The
Mm-hmm.
issue is what happens next, and of course, everybody in 2022 expects everything to play out over the course of a week, whereas hostile takeovers often take time.
Mm-hmm. Right. Yeah. So
So
possible next moves would be legal action brought by Musk or some other shareholders that are not
well,
on the board
yeah,
or something like that, right?
you basically have two futures at this point.
Okay.
Future number one is you have Musk, etc. He puts his tender out there, or for stock, he files legal action, and eventually he and the board come to an agreement. Path number two is that the board manages to come up with a competing offer, and who knows where we go from there. And path number 3 is that the board of directors is gradually removed as a consequence of the legal action brought by Musk and other shareholders. And it remains to be
There
seen.
can be a court-ordered change in the board.
Yeah, so if the court finds the board is not acting in the fiduciary interests of the shareholders, they will remove board members. And not only remove them, there are significant penalties to being on a board of directors and not acting in the interests of your shareholders. The reason why this is creating such ripples is because if it gets to court, it will be the first time that ESG as a concept for investing gets to a court of law, because I'm quite sure that the board of directors will make an ESG argument when discussing how this offer is not in the interest of its shareholders.
So help me connect that, because what is environmental or social or governance about Twitter? Governance? Is it the G in ESG?
What they're going to say, so assume this goes to court and Musk argues that, hey, listen, you're not representing the interests of your shareholders. Well, how is it the board of Twitter is going to say, well, yes, it's in the interests of our shareholders not to sell something that's worth $40 for $56?
Right.
So they're going to have, if they've got another bidder, this is not a difficult problem.
Yeah.
If they don't have another bidder, then what are they even going to say? Well, the only argument that I can think of that's available to them is that the impact of selling Twitter to Musk would be unacceptable for basically ESG reasons, right? That he's on Team Evil, and therefore we can't, it would be irresponsible of us to sell it to them. It doesn't represent the interests of our shareholders is really, they invested in Twitter because of our principles and values as a company, and selling to Musk would violate our principles and values as a company.
So is that where Jack Dorsey's attitude becomes legally relevant? That is, he came up with the idea in the first place. He had the real vision for this thing, and as a free speech platform, and he's not liking how things are going.
The issue
couldn't you come back at them and say, no, you guys are screwing up the vision? That's the problem.
The issue, it would be the first time that such a claim has ever been litigated in a U.S. court, so it's not easy to predict what the consequences of that kind of argument would be, which is why it would make a very interesting case in securities law. I think it's quite unlikely that it gets to that point. I think it's quite likely that either they solicit another bid or they cave to Musk. But it would be a great court case to see.
So that solicit another bid thing, as JG mentioned, there's some other folks with money who seem to be more on the Musk side. $43 billion. I mean, I know that in the world of big finance, that might not be as big as it sounds to regular people like us. Having said that, how many people are ready to do a $43 billion bid for Twitter, or would even be interested in it, even if they could arrange it?
Well, we're about to find out. I mean, so far none. So, I would not. I mean, given the environment for large cap tech companies right now, I would not be confident at all that Twitter will be able to solicit another bid.
I'm sorry, given what?
So, given the environment for like the state of large cap tech stocks, I mean, if you just kind of look around the NASDAQ and see what some of the high flyers from the last couple of years are doing, I would not be at all confident that there's any individual or private equity firm or something like that that's real excited to jump up and buy Twitter.
Well, you just the journalists seem very concerned about that, so the journalists could make a bid for Twitter, right?
Yeah, all the billions of dollars that the journalists have. They might have a better chance convincing USG to buy it than buying it themselves.
Yeah, right. That's what they do. try to get their buddies in the government to put a stop to it or something like that. Right? Yeah. So the point is, Musk has said, well, there's reasons to doubt this, but Musk has said that this is not really a financial move, right? That's what he explicitly said. He said this is like he's doing his civic duty. This is a platform that's become important for sort of the public debate, and he wants it to not be what it is right now, where everybody gets kicked off. If they're not if they're to the right of Chairman Mao, right? So that is what he has claimed.
You should view that as with a certain skepticism, because
yes,
of course, if you wanted to restore the valuation of Twitter, these are things you might want to say, right? So I'm not trying to be unduly skeptical of Mr. Musk, but actions speak louder than words. We'll see whether we'll see whether he buys it and restores President Trump or something like.
Yeah, right.
So.
Yeah, is Trump going to go in on this deal with him?
There's one comment from the chat here that I'd like to address.
Yeah.
What about Vanguard or BlackRock bidding for this themselves? The trouble with Vanguard and BlackRock is they don't actually have any of their own money or any significant amount of their own money. All that they have is a mandate to passively invest in public companies, the capital of their shareholders according to particular formulas. They can manipulate ESG scores to adjust the weightings in their passive investment vehicles, but they're certainly not in a position to take a large cap security like Twitter private. That would be totally outside of they would have to transform their businesses in order to attempt to do something like that.
And specifically, that's just not a thing that these big investment firms do. BlackRock and Vanguard do not have a history of taking things private, right? Now, there's somebody who does. Warren Buffett, doesn't he do stuff like that?
Yes, but this deal would be huge even by Buffett standards. This is a $46 billion acquisition. Buffett's estimated net worth is only like 80 something billion.
Yeah.
So that's a huge commitment. The kind of people who could do it. The kind of people who could do it are people like Berkshire Hathaway, the company that Buffett is a minority shareholder in, and obviously has managed for, many, many years. So the kind of people who would do it are large private equity funds like Berkshire Hathaway. So there was a rumor on Friday that there was a large private equity firm that was going to bid, though I've not seen any formal filings to that effect.
But you have to wonder, why would they do it? I mean, they would have to have some kind of political motivation almost, I would think,
Well, I would say that Twitter has never made money, and there really isn't a good reason why they've never made money. If you compare them to Facebook, Google, etc.,
who make a lot of money,
who have been able to print a lot of money. So I would say that there's a lot of merit in the idea that you should take, just from a pure dollars and cents point of view, you should take Twitter private and restructure it. I mean, one of my favorite tweets from this exchange is Elon Musk asking people to vote on whether the Twitter headquarters in San Francisco should be turned into a homeless shelter because nobody ever goes there due to COVID.
Yeah, he said it's like Trump. I don't have to be on the Trump train or be on the Musk train to find the way they do things funny, right? I mean, Elon Musk is funny. He says things that are funny, like that thing about the headquarters of Twitter. I mean, it's great, and people become on side just because they're cracking up, and because he's targeting parts of the managerial elite, I guess you could say.
Well, he's targeting people that we, have pretty substantial disagreements with. So.
Right, exactly. Yeah, he's targeting people that a lot of folks would view as enemies, and making fun of them, and trying to make them look absurd. And so there's people cheering him on, right? Oh, wait.
Okay,
now,
so
by the way, sorry. One detail from this, and then we'll stop. Oh, yeah, it's time to stop. It says the plan, the poison pill plan thing, the offer, It's set to expire on April 14th, 2023. I
Yep.
guess when you were
So
talking
poison
about it, I thought it would
pills
have a
can
shorter time span than a year. That's a long time.
well, that time span will be litigated in the court more than
Hmm.
likely if
Okay.
an agreement isn't reached.
Right. Because that seems, to me, that seems kind of long. Right.
Well, it's not unusual for a hostile takeover to transpire over a period of a couple of months, 4 or 5
Mm-hmm.
months.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah.
So,
Right.
uh, the idea is you put your poison pill date out beyond the negotiation period.
I see. Okay. Okay. So again, it's less weird what the board has done, what BlackRock have done, what Vanguard have done. It's less weird than it might seem to people who are just unfamiliar with how this market, how these kinds of transactions go, or these attempted takeovers go. Um, so yeah, did you answer my question? Is there anything weird about it?
There's nothing weird about it that we've seen so far. I mean, it's
Okay.
weird that it's that the interaction is taking place over Twitter. That's
Right. Yeah.
weird.
Yeah. Right. Right. Yeah. As opposed to private meetings and stuff.
So,
Okay. Well, let's
and it's
moving.
also like doubly weird because it's they're negotiating on Twitter for purchase of Twitter.
Yeah. Right. Right. Which is pleasingly meta. Um, okay. Well, Sam153 just says good discussion with Black Horse. Cheers. Thank you, Sam. Great supporter. Um, and I think that's where we'll leave it. I'm trying to think if there are any other stray things we wanted to comment on, but we're kind of out of time. Um, but yeah, let me just mention one more time that I have just started a Substack this week, and it might be interesting to check it out. I might be the most interested to see what happens there, but I do have some I do have some ideas about certainly about what I would post next, which is kind of a prequel to the post I already put out there, summarizing some things that crystallized in talking to Lambda last Saturday. So yeah, check it out. There's no money involved, at least for now. Maybe someday I'll try to make it into a money thing, but for now I'm just putting some articles out there. So take a look. I actually am a writer. I mean, that's really where my heart is. That's where my training is. It's what I did as a libertarian for years, 20 years ago when I was doing all this stuff. And it's just more recently that I just haven't had time to craft prose. And I have been just turning on the camera and talking to friends like Black Horse. And that's how I've been engaging. But it seems inevitable, knowing me and my background, that I will wander towards writing more and more as time and energy allows. So keep an eye on that. Okay, well, thank you, Black Horse, very much for bringing your knowledge of how these things work. And I guess what I'll be looking for on this story, hopefully from you, is because I might miss it, not knowing how these things should go. When you notice that something is like, okay, whoa, now that was weird, right? That's what the part I want to, where I want you to
Yeah.
put up the bat signal and say, okay, now that
Well,
is pretty interesting. What just happened there, right?
we should know in the next month whether this is going to proceed normally.
Right, right,
So it's a thing to keep an eye on. But
right.
that's a period of a month. This thing's been going on for like a week.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And you're saying
So
within a month, not that everything would be resolved or anything like that, but within a month, we would see that they are going to court, or it'd be the beginning of some
you'll
process that would have
you'll
to
see
play
the
out.
next step of the process, and
Yeah,
either
right.
the next step of the process is going to be normal or it's not.
Yeah, and that will be very interesting to see. And I have to say, personal stake in the game. I know people make fun of Twitter, but I kind of believe in the original vision, which is that you follow who you choose to follow and you make of it what you will. I follow my friends on Twitter. I read Black Horse and Academic Agent and Aaron McIntyre, and I have a great time, and it's a very positive atmosphere for me by and large. I don't get into arguments. I don't like to get into arguments, so I don't spend my time arguing on Twitter. I've been on Twitter since almost the beginning, since 2007. So I'm at 15 years now on Twitter, I think, and or 14 or 15. It might have been 2008, but 14 or 15 years I've been on there, a long time, and I have set it up with a special custom app. I don't use the standard Twitter app very much. I have a custom app that gives me a great view of Twitter that helps me enjoy it the way I enjoy it. So I love it, and despite all the, them kicking everybody off, and really that to me is the fix that I want. I just want my friends who got kicked off to be back on. I want Morgoth tweets
Yeah.
again.
Yeah,
Right?
exactly.
That's all I want out of
I
this.
mean,
So,
I want to laugh at former President Trump while he live tweets the debates again.
yes, absolutely. We want Trump back. We just want it to be fun again. That's what I want. So go Musk, as far as I'm concerned. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, thanks very much, and we will talk to everybody soon enough. I might be gone next week because of a court case. Not sure if we're going to be back in court or not. If so, it'll be on Thursday, unfortunately, and I'll miss the show this next week. So either see you next week or 2 weeks from today. Thanks, everybody.